Musky Factory.
Good evening and welcome again, everybody. Week 16 of the Musky Monday Seminar Series. 16. Wow, do you believe it? Thanks to Slide and the Drift for rocking us into yet another session. Here we all are after that week off. The Musky Odyssey just sucked all the air out of the room. And how appropriate was that? If you didn't get your musky fix in the last 2 weeks, I don't know what you've been paying attention to. There's so much good content these days. We'll talk about a little bit of that through the show. Today's show, jerkbaits and soft plastics. When I started fishing, the first serious muskie trip I ever went on in 1976 in Menaki in Shield country in the north, they said, here, this is how you muskie fish. This is a black bucktail, and this is a Suick, a black Suick, a bucktail, and that was it. You went out in the boat with two guys, and one stood at one end and threw the hair, and the other threw the wood. And maybe if somebody caught a couple fish on one, you knew to switch up, but you always had to go and test the waters first. Well, fast forward 60 years later, and look where we're at. Exactly the same, except that black bucktails in the modern day have turned into flashaboo, and yeah, they produce most of the fish. It's true, they produce most of the fish, but jerkbaits produce almost as many fish, and there's so many people that are missing out on using jerkbaits. So today's program is everything about jerkbaits, why we throw jerkbaits, why they work, how to throw jerkbaits, when to throw jerkbaits. We're going to show you some different presentations on using jerkbaits, and the same goes for all the soft plastics. Who better to teach us about jerkbaits than the man who has the best name in the jerkbait business? Mike Suick. His grandfather invented the first jerkbait ever 80 years ago, and so he's going to tell us about that. He's going to tell us about the Suick company in the modern day, how technology's changed, and yeah, everything jerkbait. So fantastic to have Mike here, another guest from Wisconsin. This is like our third or fourth guest out of 16 episodes from Wisconsin. It's like there's a lot of musky people out there or something. If you're from Wisconsin, say hi. We also have 3/4 of the Canadian Suick Pro Staff team here. Brent Bochek. Everywhere I look these days, on the TV, the internet, presentations, it's Brent Bochek, Brent Bochek, Brent Bochek. And so we got Brent Bochek to come out tonight and talk Suick with us again. And Lisa Goodier, the first woman on the pro staff of Suick in the history of Suick. And so couldn't have made a better choice. Someone who catches a lot of fish on Suicks already. So the team will tell Suick stories this evening on Ask the Biologist with Dr. Sean Landsman. Sean is going to tell us about skin diving in the Ottawa River this week in the name of research. That's right. Sean and Jordana went out to retrieve transponders. He's the first guy swimming in the river this year. And we're going to talk about low water. Doesn't matter where you are right now. I just talked to one of my guests in southern New York State before the show. Water is really low everywhere around him. St. Lawrence, really low. Ottawa, everywhere around here, it's really low. So we're going to talk about that in terms of what it does for spawning right now. And then we're going to look at what it does for fish in the summer. You know, concentrating them, some things you can learn this year. So let's prepare for a low water year. Thanks as always to the Musky Factory team. Mike Spratt making baits like mad in the background. Thanks as always. Lisa, you're going to be here all day. I don't have to thank you. Again, yeah, I do all the time. You do so much around here. Appreciated. Mike Kadura. Let's bring Mike out. This is a Suick loving show today. So you got Suicks on the wall behind you, and nobody told you to do that. And a curly Sue up there. I see that. So you got a good Suick story for us already?
Well, Suick is a friend of mine gave me one 10 years ago when he lost one of my baits. And I looked at it, I was like, what is this thing going to do? Looks like an eraser that I'd use in school. And I got at least 40 muskies on that bait. And my dad, who's not known as a big time fisherman, he took one cast with it on Lake Moira and popped his first big muskie, and then he was done. He was so happy, and he was like, give me that, and I retired the bait after that. So Suick and me, these are Franken Suicks back here, that orange and black spot, that's my go-to. But all three of those are, yeah, those are, I can't wait to get them, especially on those slow days, and as you get towards fall. I'm sure it'll be on one of my rods all season long. Thrilled.
Absolutely. You're like so many people that stay away from jerk baits because you action on it, because it's a little bit difficult to get the rhythm going. But one day it just tricks, and then it's a tool in the arsenal, and then it's the tool on a lot of days. So we'll tell
That's
people
right.
how to trick that in today's show. Thanks, Mike, as always, for your efforts. 100 years, big part of our team, as you all know. To Andre Lalone, Crestliner Boats and Mercury Motors. Special throw out now, my Crestliner rep extraordinaire in Canada. Boat parts and motors are so hard to get these days. Ordered a new Merc last year for my boat. Thanks for coming through big time, Jeff, and that's going on the boat next week. Very excited about that. Suick, we always say thank you to Suick, and this time we brought Mike, so I'll say thank you to him in person later on. To Sail, Canada's Outdoor Superstore, to Muskies Canada. Again, just the Odyssey. If you didn't check out the Odyssey, that content lives online now and going forward. It's legacy content. It's the world. COVID's changed a lot of things, and what COVID did is brought Muskies Canada out of the dinosaur era and forced them to use technology. And the whole muskie community this year discovered themselves online in different groups, and at all kinds of different events. And last week was 50 cool people from Muskies Canada telling really cool stories about what their chapters do. So many research people talking about projects. It was just a really exciting event because it was such a big view of the club and what it does on such a grand scale. So no matter what you thought before, if you've got an old view of Muskies Canada, for some reason you grew a hate on for them a long time ago, have a look. It's so influential. It's the place to influence muskie management. New tools like the log, the log analytics, incredible for you as an angler. So just what a great event. Peter Levick, super to you. Ryan, just what a great job at the helm of the Starship Enterprise running that. Wow event. The Musky Trader Symposium, that's starting this Friday night. Musky Trader Facebook group, raising money for muskie research. This is so cool. There's already 20K in the kitty. A bunch of it's already been handed over to Cook Labs right here in Ottawa for real research, real programs that are going on. You've been hearing about them here. This is so neat because it's the muskie community raising money to look after muskies themselves, and we can do this online now. The Musky Canada event showed us what a great event this is going to be this weekend. The whole Cook Labs team is speaking there. I'm going to be speaking there, talking about what a musky angler takes out of Project Noble Beast, in conjunction with Sean talking about Project Noble Beast. Mike Parker from Handlebars Lures is there. He's going to be talking about the telemetry study on Lake St. Clair as well. And Brent Bochek, he's going to be there as well, talking spring tactics, I think. And I won't put words in his mouth. He'll fill that in for us in a couple of minutes. So lots of good stuff, really good stuff coming up. Sean, we're going to bring Sean out in just a moment. Lisa, you got a couple pictures that I sent you to pull up at the last. You are so good. I just sent those over. We always make things as difficult and last minute as possible for Lisa, and she still does it. This is the place where I launched my canoe in the spring on the Rideau River. On the Ottawa River, not far from my house. And so last year the water would have been and the water would have been up over my shoes right there. This is where I'd be launching the boat from. And so this is what the Ottawa River looks like right now, and that's missing a lot of water. And so in the marsh areas like this is where it really takes an effect. So if you hit that second photo, Lisa, which is just an angle view to the left, that's normally an entire flooded marshland, and that you're looking at 40 acres right there, and there's no water in it, so nobody's spawning in it. And it's amazing that we go from the flood years of 2017 and 19, where the water, where I'm standing with my waist, a normal year is just up to my feet, and then this year we have this. So we'll talk to Sean about what it's going to do to fish now, and then maybe we'll look ahead to water activities in the summer. So without further ado, Dr. Sean Landsman.
What's happening there? That's right.
Hey, are all those teeth marks on the side of that yours?
Yeah. Look at all the. I call this my bearded orange fella. He's. I think this bait needs to be retired at this point, but it got my first 50-incher on Lake of the Woods. My dad, who's on watching this now, he'd remember that. That was a lot of fun. Yeah, it's great bait.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. You know, everybody who's been around incredible Suick stories, and everybody who's been around has the old wooden Suicks, just like you did, with busted up noses and pieces missing, and they still have, don't they? So.
Oh yeah. It's
fish
great.
until you can't fish them till you can't.
It
is, and it worked for. You know, and when you listen to why Mike's grandfather invented that, watching the trout in his pond, it's got a very base biological attachment to everything about it. So we'll let Mike tell that big secret to everybody coming up shortly. Sean, how's the water?
You broke up there a second. What did you say, John?
I was saying, how's the water?
The water.
Is it good? Should we all go swimming?
So I have to say that I haven't gotten into my wetsuit in a long time. And as cold as the water was, it was 52, 53. It felt great. I have to say that my head was really cold. I have a pretty thick wetsuit, and I have an integrated hood. And even with the integrated hood, my head was still pretty cold. But you know what? I lasted for a couple of hours before we had another person on the boat and said, you know, it's your turn. But it was a lot of fun. We were going down trying to retrieve these underwater listening stations that are out in the Echolands stretch of the Rideau River. So I actually ended up seeing a muskie while I was snorkeling, and the muskie led me right over to one of the receivers, one of these listening stations that I was looking for, and then just sat right next to it. I couldn't believe it. Then it darted away. It wouldn't let me get too close, but it was a lot of fun. So I'll talk a little bit about, you know, some of the things that some of my observations, I guess, on the water, when we were on the water on Saturday, and some of my thoughts about what these lower water levels might mean this year. But I'll also give you a little bit of a different perspective on what low water levels might mean, and perhaps some reason not to necessarily get too concerned just yet. But in the meantime, I'm going to show you, before I actually start launching into that, just before getting on this program, I actually joined my friend, who I'm hoping will actually do a program on the Musky Mondays live stream coming up soon, Hedrick Wachelka. Let me show you guys a picture of this. So this is Hedrick. I caught him. He's blinking his eyes there. But Hedrick does an annual dead fish walk around the Rideau Canal system here in Ottawa. And he likes to get data on dead muskies whenever he can, which usually means jumping down into the muck to retrieve these dead fish, and take what he's doing on the left photo there. He's actually taking the clithrum bone out, which is right at the edge of the gill plate. And that clithrum bone can be used to age the fish. There's a whole clithrum project which is run by Dr. John Castleman at Queen's University, and so Hedrick, he's one of the few people now that's submitting these clithrum bones for aging. So we went down there. He told me that there was this dead muskie there, and jumps in. He thought it was about 30 inches. Turns out when I got to the spot, I said, that's bigger than 30. Turns out it was 46 inches. It's a nice fish. We think you can see all the algae on it. And we think that fish probably died over the winter, which is a normal occurrence. Usually fish over winter will perish for various reasons, and their bodies will often float up to the surface in the spring. So for anyone curious, that fish definitely smelled as nasty as it looks. But I was pretty amused. So anyway, I just wanted to share that with everyone. I thought folks would get a kick out of that. So yeah, as John mentioned, I was snorkeling on Saturday here in the Rideau, and it's rather normal for the Rideau system to look this low, because in the Rideau they draw down the water levels in the fall, but it's lower than it normally is. And I'll show you a graph of what it should normally be in just a minute. But when I was out there, I was surprised to hear, when we took a water temperature reading, that right at the start, so about 11 a.m., it was 52 to 53 Fahrenheit. To give you some perspective, muskie start spawning around 9 to 10 Celsius, or about 50 Fahrenheit. So we were kind of right at the beginning of spawning, and the water levels are still really low. In this system, they'll probably come up at like 6 to 8 feet. You can see the top of those stones there, those cement squares. That's where the water line more or less is supposed to be. And you can see that all that distance there to the water line right now. So it's a little bit concerning, but again, it's more or less normal for this time of year. That said, just to see some drawdown, but that said, water levels are lower than they should be at this time of year. So you can ignore most of the lines on this graph, except for the one where the arrow says historic, and then the dark black one that says current. And so that historic line there, that's where the water level should be. And you can see that right now it's below that. And we had a big spike at the end of March there with a rain event, and then it's stayed low ever since, and is not up to kind of the normal water level at this time of year. So even if the river comes up, 6 to 8 feet, it may still mean that some of the typical spawning habitat is not inundated with water like it would normally be during the year. So from a water level perspective, the absolute worst thing that can happen is that you have water levels that drop during the act of spawning for muskies. And the problem with this is that the eggs get exposed because muskies tend to, and I'll come back to this in a second, but tend to spawn in pretty shallow water. By dropping those eggs, or by dropping the water shortly after the eggs have been deposited on the river bottom or lake bottom, you end up exposing them to air, and of course they just desiccate and they die. The thing that we really want to see is actually a natural spring flooding event. So not like flooding like crazy 1 in 1,000 year floods, but these annual pulses of water that come downstream or feed into a lake from its tributaries following snowmelt. And so we would call these freshets. These are a good thing. These floods help inundate these backwater habitats where there's a bunch of marsh and vegetation. Muskies love that kind of habitat. Okay, and this sort of spring flooding is associated with successful reproduction. One of the things that we need to keep in mind relative to water levels and if they drop, what happens if they drop? Well, if they drop, that's not necessarily a bad thing as long as there's still some water movement somewhere where the eggs have been laid, even if the water's dropped. So this becomes not so bad, I think, in river systems where you still probably have water flowing through just by the very nature of it being a river. So for example, on the St. Lawrence, there are areas of the St. Lawrence where muskies will spawn in these really highly developed shorelines with, lots of runoff and silt and muck that comes in off the land. And yet they seem to spawn there year after year after year. And there's little YOY, little juveniles that get found in these areas. And so it's kind of curious because on the one hand you go, oh, well, no, surely like they wouldn't be able to successfully reproduce in a habitat like that, but yet they seem to be doing that. And the thinking is that, well, maybe there's just enough water flow going through those areas that they actually help aerate the eggs. And the thing with muskies is they're broadcast spawners, so they just drop the eggs and continue swimming on, like you see in the bottom photo there. Whereas like a bass will sit there, and what that bass is doing, that male is actually fanning the nest. They'll tilt their bodies up like that and fan the nest, and that keeps silt away and helps get water moving over the eggs, and that water movement helps bring oxygen over the eggs. But one of the things that we really do actually need is for the sediments that these muskies would be spawning over eventually, we actually need those sediments to be aerated. So what we need to see is this natural like water level fluctuation during the year, where at some point during the year, the water levels will fluctuate such that they drop. The sediment gets exposed to the air. You get a bunch of oxygen going into the sediment. And then eventually what we need to see is the floods actually getting back into those areas and resaturating those sediments with water to create spawning habitat. And so what occurs, the reason we need this, okay, the reason we need this is because the musky eggs will sit on the bottom. And if there's no oxygen coming up from the sediment, the eggs aren't going to be getting the oxygen that they need. And so these are a couple of graphs here showing you kind of the ideal situation, which is on the left, where you've got well oxygenated sediment. And then right where the sediment meets the water, where the eggs would be, you've actually got quite a bit of oxygen there because you've got a lot of oxygen within the sediment that's getting released and coming up into the water column. What we don't want to have happen is a situation where these sediments haven't been exposed to air or there's not enough mixing or something. And you get this situation where there's low oxygen within the sediments. And so there's very little oxygen at where the sediment meets the water, right? And so the musky eggs can't get enough oxygen because there's just not enough at that, what we call the benthic boundary layer. And so that's the worst. That's a bad scenario that can probably lead to reproductive failure. And so this whole thing of like the benthic boundary layer and lack of oxygen in silty sediments is thought to be one of the kind of contributing factors that lead to reproductive failure in systems that are supported through stocking. So there's many fisheries, primarily in the United States, that are maintained solely through stocking. I'm from the state of Illinois. That's where I grew up. And all of our fisheries there are fully maintained through stocking. And there's probably a number of reasons that contribute to reproductive failure. But certainly if you've got very low oxygen sediments and not a lot of oxygenation going on, you've got a lot of silt, a lot of muck. It can suffocate the eggs. There's just lack of appropriate habitat. There's not enough There are not enough water fluctuations that can flood these backwater areas, or those backwater areas are just full of clay and muck and silt. There may be an issue with the stocked fish actually not imprinting correctly and so they can't find the right habitat to spawn in. There might be too many predators. So there's a number of reasons that we might see some reproductive failure in stocked waters. But generally speaking, we do need to see these, periodic, cyclical, I should say, fluctuations in water. So what we're seeing this year, okay, may not necessarily be bad unless the whole spring goes by and those areas don't get flooded with water. Those backwater areas, those marshy areas, those don't get flooded with water, then you might see some effects on reproduction if the muskies can't get back to their spawning habitats. But one thing I will say is we do know that muskies can sometimes spawn in deeper water than northern pike, which tend to really need those backwater areas. So I don't think it's necessarily doom and gloom if we see low water levels at this time of year. I mean, where there's a will, there's a way. That said, if we don't see any more flooding of those backwater areas between now and when the water temperature hits, the low 60s, kind of the end of the spawning period, then that we might see some reproductive failures as a result of that. So again, as always, if you've got any more questions, you can email them directly to me, or you can hit me up on social media, Instagram or Twitter. And I'll take any questions you've got for me. You can fire my way through my email or social media.
Fantastic as always, Sean. Let me ask you to look ahead to the summer, because everybody that I have talked low water this year, and so what does that change in the summertime about muskie behavior, or what is as a muskie angler? What is that saying to you?
Yeah, I think what it does is it just removes the amount of available habitat. Where muskies might be able to access some of those, inside weed edges that they've been able to access historically, they're not going to be able to access some of that. I think that what you're going to probably find is maybe more fish hanging just on the edges of like, say, weed beds, as opposed to being up on the flats. So what it's basically going to do is just shrinks the boundaries of the lake or river. And so as those boundaries shrink, those fish will move away from the shoreline as a result. When the water levels come up, that opens up tons of new habitat, and fish can get up into, that's a thing that we do on the Rideau. If the water levels come up, probably on the Ottawa too, but when the water levels come up, you can get up into some of these real shallow areas and find fish in those zones. So I think it's the opposite. I think we're going to see the opposite of that this year if water levels remain low, that fish are going to be kind of hanging a lot more on the edges and maybe just off of structure for majority of the year.
Yeah, I think so too. It's different every year on the Ottawa, and that's one of the neat things about fishing out there, and it's different section by section almost. One of the things that usually happens in the low water years is the weeds end up getting so thick that they end up on the surf. You can't fish in the weeds anymore. So the muskies that are hiding in the weeds, that's a really good place. You just can't get anything in there. But it shows you the weed edge very clearly all over the river. And in the past, I've told my guides on a low water year, take pictures this year, because you're not going to see this every year. And that weed edge every year, whether you see it or not, when your weeds are emerging, that weed edge you're seeing now that is so distinct and drawn out, that works. So, it concentrates the fish. That weed edge is a key, and take some pictures and store them along with your Muskies Canada logs for later. All right, Fantastic, Sean. Thank you as usual.
Cool.
Great work.
Thanks, John.
Pleasure. Jerk baits and soft plastics. Who better to tell us about them than Mike Suick? It sounds like it's a Homer show because everybody on the staff and myself are all in love with Suicks. But, you know, we were all in love with Suicks long before I knew Mike or before I knew anything about the company. It was just to catch fish. This bait caught fish. And so, you know, my relationship with Mike and Suick came much later from meeting him at the shows in the US, in Ohio and in Pennsylvania. And he's just a heck of a nice guy. And I can attest, good family man too, because we tried to get him on the show last week, and he turned us down because it was his fiance's birthday. And so there's not a lot of musky guys would make that decision. And, you know, that's a good family man right there. So well done to you, Mike. He's going to come out and tell us about the history, why they work, and about the Tuesday night Musky League. This is going to start Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday night Musky Leagues up. I predict that this is going to be the birthplace of those kinds of things on this show. So Mike Suick, actually Lisa's got a video, a little measure of some pictures I think she wants to show. Well done. Rocking out with the good. Welcome, Mike Suick, and thanks for being here.
Pleasure to be here, John. Thanks for having me.
Super. And we've got the Suick team, the Eastern Canadian Suick team with Brent and Lisa. Let's get them out here as well. This is a foreplay today. The gang is all here. Nice set of fish. Are all those Wisconsin fish? No pictures?
There are a couple Lake of the Woods fish in that mix there, but most of them are Wisconsin, yeah.
Okay. Beautiful greens. Really nice looking fish. Not too different from our fish as well. I wanted to get you. I love the story of the birth of Suick Lures, how your grandfather came up with this, and the lore and the legend around that. So why don't you tell us that to start us out, and how he came up with the idea for a Suick?
Yeah, sure. This dates back to the early to mid 30s. He was a bar owner here in Anigo, owned a trout hatchery as well. And if he wasn't working in the bar or in the trout hatchery, he was musky fishing. So he noticed in his hatchery that if there was a dead or dying trout, it would attract all the other ones that come and kind of take a look and see what's going on. And he got thinking, you know, why wouldn't the muskie be curious as well? I mean, we all kind of know that now, but back then they didn't. So he just started whittling away at a jerkbait, trying to give it a try and see what would work. And he made a lot that didn't work. In fact, originally they didn't have a metal tail; they had a wood tail. The metal tail was an accident. He cut the wood one off and put the metal one on, and then realized then that he could, you know, tune it and make it work how he wanted. So that's kind of how it got started. He really didn't offer them for sale till probably, well, early 1939 or so. And it was at that point just completely word of mouth. A lot of sales were through his bar. People would hear about it and come by and see if they can get one from him. In fact, I got one here. This is one of the original ones. I don't know if you can see that very well. That's what they looked like right when they first came out. This was the original box, and this would be one of the original lures. So that's not the first, but close to the first. So that's kind of how it got started, and it ran that way for a long time. It didn't really take off big, and I mean, take off at all, really, until about 1950. That's when my grandpa and his brother got involved with the business, and they ran it themselves. They owned a movie theater as well. They made them on top of the movie theater, and they did that until 1980. That's when my dad got involved. In 1980, they moved into their own building, and that's when it took off. So. So then my dad was involved from 1980 on, and he still works every day. And I got involved in 2010.
That is. No, if I missed something here, you guys are freezing up a lot. I missed a lot of things for a lot of them, but mostly because you guys are freezing up right now. In case I'm not keeping up with this. So neat that it's 3 generations. I think that the key of that whole story for me is the trout pond and the dying fish, because there are some basic things in nature that cause other live things to react, and when an animal is in distress, it's a signal in nature for something stronger to go and kill it. And your great-grandfather, your grandfather watching that in the trout pond, it's a simple motion. A fish that is injured is up on the surface, diving down, and it can't stay down and looks back up, and it dives down and it floats back up. And that's, that is so simple, and yet it appeals to everywhere, and that's the birth of the jerkbait. And that motion, was effective 80 years ago. And I heard it was so effective on the lake that he was fishing on. I don't know if that's the lake where the bar is at first, that, and he wouldn't share it or tell anybody. And all the locals actually blackmailed him. They told him that he had to sell it to them, or that, or they were going to make it illegal on the lake because it was catching too many fish. Is there any truth to that?
Yeah, there is. That actually started out as a joke. It went on as a joke for a while, and then there was actually a property owner that refused to pay his taxes until something was done, and then they had to stop the joke at that point. But yeah, that happened.
Fantastic. Brent and Lisa, two huge students as well. I don't know if there's anything. I haven't even introduced you or given you a chance to talk yet. Hey, Brent, how you doing?
I'm doing great, John. How are you guys? Thanks for having me on tonight.
A pleasure as always. You wear the Suick shirt pretty much 7 days a week, don't you?
I work quite a bit.
There you go. Now, I hope it smells better than Hedrick's muskie. That one that you saw Hedrick going to get to do it in the crops yacht. I bet Hedrick's been bringing those in Canada chapter meetings for years, and even after you take that Clyde trombone out, still has this smell to it years later. And so, anyway, I wanted to mention that when I saw him doing that earlier. Between us, we've got a whole bunch of Suick stories. I thought one of the best ways to teach how to use a Suick was just to do it off of pictures and videos. And so compiled we put some different stuff in the pot for tonight. And Lisa's going to pull up a couple of pictures to start of a couple really good mine. And let's talk about presentations with bait off of this. So this is Dale Cressman. And I've been fishing with Dale and Jay for a bunch of years. And Dale only throws, one bait pretty much. After this day, it was cemented. He really only throws one bait. He throws a 9-inch Fire Tiger floating Suick. And he works it slower than I ever taught anybody to, or than I teach people to. But, he's been a pike guide for decades and decades in Northern Ontario. And he comes here and we go out in the morning and he catches this fish on the weeds, fish of his life, on his Fire Tiger Suick. And then if you hit the next picture, Lisa, we go out later in the day and there's smiling big brother Jay in the background, and late in the day sunset, he catches it. So, you know, at lunch we were reveling in that first fish of a lifetime, and didn't matter if whatever happened for the rest of the trip. And then, as is often the case with your best muskie stories, you know, this one came after. Now, Dale works that bait slowly, and it's a floating. I like the sinking. I always prefer sinking Suicks myself, the weighted Suicks, because that hang in the water, that pause works great for me. But I know so many older people who just fish slower, and a Suick is a perfect bait for them. And it doesn't matter if I tell fish it faster, they just fish it slow. So I've fished with Dale for a whole lot of years, and he's just got that slow action repeating, you know, like the trout in the pond, and he's not in a hurry. And that action right there is one that works really well. So simple, not fast. You know, people say musky fishing is a lot of work. That 9-inch Suick is not heavy. Again, simple principle, and it works. So, you know, and I've seen the old guys trick fish with that more than anyone else out in the boat, because they do everything slower, and it just works. So that's probably, you know, one of my favorite presentations. It's not the one I teach, but definitely one I'll start with in the boat. Brent, what do you got to say about presenting a Suick? What do you like?
Working it slow sometimes when nothing else is going on. You know what? It may be bluebird skies or whatever. You don't see a lot of birds around. Things aren't happening. I'll actually throw the wobble, the Suick wobble, and work that real slow. And that'll actually trigger a fish on those days when nothing's happening just by working it slow. Where, you know, when you're burning blades or working a Suick real fast, or how I normally would, sometimes it's for those days when nothing's happening is when those working that bait real slow, it just seems to, you know, it triggers a fish. Maybe it just thinks it's such an easy meal because it's moving slow.
Yeah, and actually, to add to that, Brent, for years we were teaching people to use unweighted lures in the weeds. We told people that forever. And in the last couple of years, we found that sometimes if you use a weighted one in the weeds, even, you can slow it down just enough, rip it through, and you can pull fish out of there just like that too.
That being said, sometimes working an extra fast pays off. Oh, sorry. Sometimes you know, working them extra fast even pays off too. I've seen that.
Yeah.
There was an old In Fisherman video years ago where I learned that.
Yeah, we'll talk about that for a minute, but it's interesting that you talk about fishing a Suick in the weed, because, you know, the neat thing about fishing lures is they never come with instructions, most of them. So you just get a box and a lure, and then you decide what to do. Our baits were an especially neat thing because nobody knew what to do with the big curly tails. And so, you know, different people do different things with them. And Canadians don't throw jerk baits in the weeds. We are, us up here in general, we musky guys, you know, you get weeds on your lure when you're in the weeds. That seems like a lot of work. And in Northern Ontario, they do that. But out here in the East, we fish weed edges. People tend to fish weed edges, fish off of the weeds. And, you know, 20 years ago, I started having my American guests say to me, you know, that shallow weed bed wouldn't be here on my lake because people would have thrown Suicks into it and ripped it all out. And so, you know, getting right into the weeds with the Suicks, having a little bit of weed on your lure, it's not a problem. It's not the problem for the fish that it is for the angler most of the time. So, yeah, good point on getting into the weeds. Absolutely. Lisa, what do you like for a presentation with a Suick? What works for you?
Well, just to add to what you just said, John, it just made me think of something that happened last year. I had a guy who was bringing in a curly Sue, and it was actually fouled. He had casted it funny, twisted up, got caught on the hook. He caught it in weeds, brought it in, still finished at the side of the boat, and a fish took a swipe at it. So it's just another reminder to always finish your cast. You just never know, that's for sure. And I just wanted to share a comment.
Yeah, you know.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, please. I didn't mean to interrupt. Please.
I was just
Continue.
going to share a comment that we had from a regular viewer of the show, and a good friend of mine, Luke Gerard. He's wondering, is that his new Franken Suick behind me? And I'm sorry to tell you, Luke, it's not. But don't worry, I'm looking after it for you. I got it here. What do you got, John?
Fantastic. And in terms of presentation, I got to say, well, man, there's so many things to say. I fished the weighted Suicks. When I was young, I fished the floating Suicks and get back up on the surface. But for me, the presentation, the weighted Suick hangs better than any other baits that I know, and you can tweak them and play with them and just get that bait to just hang and hover. And when a Suick hovers, it rises very slowly. It's got a slight flutter and a very slight twist on its own. And so there's a whole motion. And so when you want to fish slow, a lot of musky guys can only fish fast. And there's a whole community of guys out there that only want to throw blades and that only want to bring them in fast. And the muskies, how they want to catch muskies. And there's a lot of times. I mean, we've been talking behavior on this program. 2/3 of the time, the fish in, on, or near the bottom, inactive. And so that fast is not it a lot of the time. It's slow, it's degrees of slow. And so that weighted Suick, just hanging near fish and resting near fish that wouldn't do anything else, that's a trigger. And so for me, that weighted Suick, that's been my money presentation for so many years. For inactive fish, especially late in the year. So absolutely love that.
Hey, John, if you want to, one tip when you have a cold front or real cold water situation, or even a high pressure situation in the summer, putting a rubber core sinker just in front of your leader. When you give that bait a pull, it'll raise up, and if you got the right size weight on there, it'll actually just sit there neutral buoyant. And then you can let it sit for a couple seconds before you give it another pull.
Well, there's a whole bunch of things that we did through time to modify our flicks to get that exact hovering, that just right buoyancy. And, we used to take solder and wrap it around the hooks to keep the balance on the lure, so that it pulled it all down evenly, whatever it takes. The Franken Suicks, I love that they come with the weight kit now, so you can adjust to whatever you want. For me, it comes out of the box just perfect, and it does stay down so much longer. But that pause, that rest, it's such a big trigger for fish, so the weighted Suick with that, the floating Suicks, up surface, all of them with that base motion. There's reasons why this works. And you said a fast retrieve works, so I have to show a picture of my friend Brian Osborne. Lisa, do you have a picture of Brian there? So Brian's been started as a client years and years ago. He and Danny are great friends. Brian's been chasing a 40-pounder forever. That's as close as he got, within a pound. That fish was in November this year, and it was caught on a Suick. Now, funny story. You can get we won't give those people credit yet. We'll go back to that Brian photo if you could, just for a second, or I can just talk about it for a second. I got Brian onto Suicks probably 5 or 6 years ago, maybe 6, 7 years ago, and I taught him to work them faster in the summer. In the summer we're working our baits quicker, and then we transitioned into the fall. And I hadn't seen him for a while, and I never got to tell him to go slower. We got into cold water time, and at that time, I'm really using the weighted Suicks to slow down. And I'm talking to him, and he's having his best fall ever. And he's working Suicks fast in the cold water in the fall. That's not what I do. Not what I taught you to do. But, if you're out there, Brian or Danny, send in the number. I know you guys watch the show. Like the last 5 or 6 years, Brian has something 70, 60, 70, 80 fish in the fall on just Suicks and great big fish. So, there isn't a wrong way to work it. I teach a couple of retrieves, but with the jerkbait, it's a natural, it's got that natural appeal. It just works. Anyone else?
Yeah, it's just for me working it for the most part, say early season right through till the fall is a steady retrieve. It's probably about a 5 or 6 foot sweep of the rod tip. And one of the keys though is making sure you reel up your slack before you start your next pull. That way, because otherwise you're going to be, it's going to twitch on you. It's not going to have that steady cadence if you don't get that slack picked up first.
Yeah, I often, good point, Brent, because what I'll do is pick my reel, whether I go with the regular or the high gear tranks based on how I'm working the Suick. Sometimes if I'm doing a big long sweep, obviously I want to be able to pick my line up really quickly, but sometimes I want to be able to use the lower gear ratio to work it quicker. So, yeah, I think that's a good point for sure.
Yeah, I mean, a comment we hear a lot too is people are afraid that they're doing something wrong. And sometimes you just don't know how to work it. You don't know how they're going to react. So if it's in the water, you're not doing anything wrong. You gotta start somewhere.
Yeah, I actually had a client last year. She got a trip for her boyfriend, and to be honest with you, she really didn't want to be there. She was being the supportive girlfriend, and she was cast into, and she was really working it just sort of like bait was moving 3 inches at a time, and I was kind of let her do her thing, and of course the fish came up, grabbed it. She screamed because it was a fairly decent sized fish, threw the rod to her boyfriend and said, "I'm not touching it." But it's just the point. It's so versatile. There's so many different ways that you can work it, and I think that's why I love it so much.
Yeah, there really is.
Another key thing is your body positioning when you're working a bait like that. You want to be making sure you're sweeping across the front of your body. That way you get, you can make that long sweep if you want. And also when you get a fish bite, a fish hits it, you're in the proper position to set the hook properly and really lay it to them.
Right.
So we do have a question there, guys, from the viewer wondering what type of rod length the panel likes on a Suick jerkbait.
And that, it's funny. I was just going to address how the equipment dictated how people used the loop in the old days and how it's changed, because the jerkbait rod traditionally is a pool cue, about an 18-ounce weight pool cue taken right off the wall at the Suick bar in Wisconsin. It's 5 feet long, and you stand right in the corner of the boat, and it's just, there was a whole motion to it. If Ed Crum is out there, man, I get to fish with Dr. Ed out of Cleveland, and he's the best old school jerkbait guy I've seen. And he comes and gets in my boat now. Ed is 83, 81 last time we fished, and he still brings the 5.5 foot pool cue rod, because that's how he learned, and he caught so many fish on Chautauqua doing that. And that rod lets you have very distinct 2 and 3 foot pulls, and that was all they had. That's all we had in the musky world for years and years. And so that was how Suicks became famous, with little 2 and repetitive pulls over and over, and reels that had a very slow pickup. So there wasn't a lot of slack line, and that was the technique. You get into today's equipment, and the reel, I like to throw that 9 foot skicks and the 9.5 foot skicks to my guest. That's a whole lot different than a 5.5 foot jerkbait rod, and a whole lot different motion to use. And the reel touched on it a moment ago, Lisa. The reels pick up so much more line. You can actually use if you're really lazy as a fisherman, or you have sore shoulders, sore elbows. I do. My honest to God, man, my parts ache. I'm not going, but let the equipment do the work for you, and you can use that 39-inch retrieve on a high-speed trank to your jerkbait. Now that 39 inches in one handle revolution is the same 3 feet that this lure was built on and was successful on for so many more years. And then, that 9.5 foot rod now, a lot of the best people, Andy Pappas, Mike Spratt, my partner in Musky Factory Baits, we make these, but Mike is a jerkbait mass, and he's a tall, long, slim guy who uses a long fishing rod, and he's reeling while he's moving the rod. And so his is going 12 feet at a time and coming to a rest. Instead of that traditional 3 foot pull, it's 8, 10, or 12 feet and then a pause. And another key to the retrieve, I'm on a ramble here, I know, but I hope it's good, is reeling back on that slack line. When you pull on a jerk bait, you don't pull and just let the line go slack and reel back on it. And that's the key. That's what we coach people on out on the boat, is you need to actually make that motion, but keep the reel going and pick up your slack so that your line never goes slack and drops. It actually stays straight. And when there's a little bit of tension on that Suick, now it stays suspended. Now you get to work at 3 and 4 feet down. So, the long rods, the higher pickup reels, and in the Ottawa River, I think you have the perfect visibility for 8 and 10 foot pull, 4, 5, 6 feet. And so you're just coming into the range and getting out. And so, so many reasons why it works. And the modern equipment's changed the way you can use it.
Yeah, my first jerkbait rod was a 5'9" Fenwick, and now I still don't go with a real long rod. 8'6" is what I like. It's what I'm comfortable with. You're comfortable with a little bit longer rod, I think. I'm comfortable with the 8'6". So, and for me, with my cadence, that just seems to work perfect for me. So, I think a lot of your rod length really depends on the cadence and what you're comfortable with.
I agree. I use 8'6" pretty much exclusively, and not only for the cadence too, but it makes the figure 8 so much easier. You can get such a big, wide figure 8 that's deep with less effort too. And it's amazing the percentage of fish you catch on the 8. Mm-hmm.
Especially here. And wow, that was a really good segue, Mike. You didn't realize it, but Lisa may have a video queued up ready of a fish caught at the side of the boat on a figure 8 on a Suick. Is that possible, Lisa?
It is possible. Yeah, you cut out a little bit there. Which one am I pulling up? Your fish?
The figure 8 Suick. Yeah. There's a couple of good teaching points off of this.
Brent, was that the one in the dark?
No, that'd be a fish that John caught. If it's my video.
Okay. You don't actually see the figure 8, but we'll start with that one.
We're gonna come around the other side, Brent.
Get the big old net here ready for you whenever.
Okay, this time, baby.
Cool. Sorry, I didn't want to do him when he was flipping. Nicely done, sir. All right.
Made us work for that.
We sure did.
I got a place for that in this boat, Brent. I'll show you what I do.
Okay.
I got her.
That way you don't lose your net. I like that idea, John.
No, you got to keep track of your net.
You got some pliers and the hook cutters right there.
I do. And I'm gonna hit anchor on my.
What'd that fish hit?
The go-to bait. The sucker-colored Suick.
That was we were talking about that earlier being your favorite. There it is. The magic bait of the hour. Right there. What's that, a 10-inch or?
12-inch.
12-inch. Weighted Suick thriller in the sucker color. All right.
That's the fall go-to.
That's her.
Yeah. And there is what we've been working so hard for.
We did work hard for that fish.
We did. And what's the first thing that we did after we caught that, Brent? The very first thing.
I think we made a phone call.
Just really, really quick call.
Suick lure.
Hey, is this Steve?
Yes, it is.
Hey, it's Brent Bochek. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing good, Brent. How you doing?
Good. I want you to say hi to somebody for me.
Hey, Steve. John Anderson here. How you doing?
We're doing pretty damn good, by God. How the heck are you doing up there?
We're doing great. John just put a fish in the boat on a 12-inch weighted Suick.
Nice. Hopefully there's some size to it.
On camera.
It's a good-looking fish. We're going to get a bigger. We got a nice one. We're going to get a bigger one shortly.
Fantastic. Oh, damn it, that's great. You guys how's the weather up there?
It's musky season. It's beautiful.
Canadian musky season, yeah.
But we got to go here because we're right on a peak and we got to get another fish for you.
Sounds good. Appreciate the call. Give me a call when you get all done. Let me know what's going on.
Well, dude, take care, Steve.
All the best, Steve. Thanks.
Nice talking to you, John.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Sweet.
What about me? You didn't say nice talking to me.
You didn't catch the fish.
All right, let's go.
All right, yeah. So first thing we do is we call Suick when we catch a big fish on a Suick. There's a whole bunch of learning points off of that little segment, and we didn't get to see the figure 8 part. I wasn't good on missed out on the editing, but you know the one thing I fish Suicks based on bottom color, and so when I said you only need one color Suick. The one that you held up at the start of the show from 80 years ago, Mike, you know, that's the same bottom color as this. And if you know, we've talked about muskies laying on the bottom over and over. Sean talked about what a muskie sees. Eyes on the top of it, they're looking up. And so what color are the bellies of all the fish that muskies are going to eat? And so, you know, this is where you start. This is the basic. And then an orange, and then a yellow, you know, and then a yellow bottom. Then you've got 3. But, you know, if you pick 3 colors to start with like that, they're not seeing the top of the bait. They're seeing the bottom and the sides and that white bottom. If you only buy one jerkbait, get these. And this is my Franken Suick, actually, from last fall. But, you know, same thing. That sucker pattern just does it. People say jerkbaits are hard to figure 8 at the side of the boat. You know, that's one of the complaints I hear about them. But the truth is, with an 8.5, an 8, an 8.5, a 9-foot rod, that lure follows your rod tip. And so as long as I have a short lead, you know, our Musky Factory leaders are 12 inches long, complete for a reason, because you want that short lead, and even a bait like a Suick that's not made to do those tight corners follows you aquadynamically around in the circle. You know, and a lot of times we pulse this while we're fishing at the side of the boat, you know, as well. So in terms of finishing, to get the strike at the boat, at the side of the boat, that's 2 ways. And I have to add one of my favorite strikes in all of fishing is not finishing with a figure 8 at the side of the boat. You know, we usually transitioning that speed into a finish is so important with all the baits that we fish with. But a lot of times, or just for a change with the Suick, you can stop 8 or 10 or 12 feet off the side of the boat. And if your bait's down 3 feet, you can give it the 5, 6, 7 seconds to just rise up at the side of the boat. One of the prettiest visual strikes you'll ever get is that fish coming up, and they come up and hit it a special way. They come up and turn on it, you know, as it just before it gets up to the surface, they come up and turn on it. And so, you know, all of those for finishing at the boat work really well.
That technique you're talking about there, John. Years ago, I was fortunate to fish with Roger Sabata, who Mike knows, at the Pete Mill Muskie Hunt in Wisconsin, and he was talking about his son getting about 10 feet from the boat and letting that bait just raise straight up, just like you were talking, and having fish hit it. And I learned that technique a long time ago, and that's like you said, that's pretty cool the way the fish will hit that.
Yeah, we had another good
one
question.
One of the prettiest things that you.
Go ahead, John. Sorry. We just had a comment.
No, you guys are freezing up a little bit.
Yeah, you're
If
having
we
some
missed a
connection
comment, if I
problems
talked
tonight.
over a comment,
Yeah, it's all right. You're having some connection
if I
problems. We
talked
got you.
over a
Don't-
comment, that's
We had a comment on a point that I know you wanted to touch on tonight, John. Jeff, if you can read this, when tossing larger lures like Suicks, are you still inclined to remove the trailing hooks and just use the head?
I don't cut the hook off, the trailer hook, the third hook off. But if throughout the day, if I have to cut that hook off for whatever reason and I don't have it on, it doesn't really bother me too much, especially in warm water periods when it's fish are more active.
Mm-hmm.
In the fall, sometimes you will get them hitting that tail hook a little bit more, but during the summertime, if I don't have that tail hook on, it doesn't bother me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I did want to mention this to people because, one of the neat things in the muskie world is there's so many new people coming to muskie fishing. It is a hot sport. There's all kinds of new people coming to it. That means more fish caught, more handling. And in Canada, we're all natural reproduction. And so, more handling, more catching does mean more mortality. And so there's a lot of people talking about upping our game as a community, how we do that. And so one of the that I do in spring, summer, and early fall, a lot of the time, is take the back hook off of my larger Suicks. And it's not like we catch too many muskies. So I'll say to people that use jerkbaits, if you're worried about not catching fish, count your next 10 fish that you catch on a jerkbait and look and see where you caught them. And all 10 of those fish, I bet you, will be at least 2 hooks. Okay. The only time that you're getting fish on this back hook for me is when it's a mistake. If it's early in the year, really dirty water, you jerked when the fish was trying to hit, but in the end of the year, that's when you get fish that'll get the back end of a lure. That's when I want this hook. But in the summer, they are so adept at hitting this in the head 9 out of 10 times. The other time they're going to get it here, and have that metal hook. So, for a little better treatment of fish, if you want, you can take that back hook off. It's a good point and something that you can do, certainly with larger baits. Absolutely.
Yeah, I know. If I look at a lot of my Suicks where I've ended up cutting hooks off, I'll have split rings on the first 2 and nothing on the back. And the back hook will still be original because that hook doesn't get hit. It doesn't get hit very often at all.
Absolutely. We've covered a lot of stuff on jerkbaits. I guess two things that we didn't cover that I think are important. One, you talked about fishing in blue skies, Brent, and we talked about, again, sometimes it's things that are so simple that are big keys. And blue skies and high pressure is a time when fish don't want to move. They don't chase. Their strike zone is very, you need to change the way that you're fishing a lot of the time. One of the features of a Suick for me that is really big on the sunny days is the silver tail. Now, in nature, if you're a smallmouth, and you know this, when you get a smallmouth with your hook in its mouth, it's coming to your boat with 5 other smallmouth who want to take that out of its mouth because that fish is feeding, and that's a key for everybody else to feed. And so that flash at the back, this bait is on a pause in the sunshine in the blue sky. That tail and the reflectivity of it, it's a strobe light. It's a flash. And what it looks like is a fish eating another fish, or a moon eye, or an emerald shine turning to get away from another fish. It's somebody feeding. And that, again, it's a really simple trigger in nature, but at a time when your fish aren't moving, for me, that's a reason, that's a good reason to throw a Suick and a good time to throw a Suick. And in terms of color, if you've watched this seminar series, we've talked blue skies and and bright days and high pressure, get your really crazy colors on. And that's when I'm going to be going with my orange bellied Suicks, my really bright Suicks. Anything that's orange or sherbet. Yeah. Jamie Pistola last week about the new sherbet pattern that he got from you guys. It just creamsicle that he absolutely loves. Just crushed fish on last year. So, in the tough conditions, that's a really good time for that as well. And then you have a Franken Suick. Let's do 2-in-1. If you play that nighttime video, that's a late fall nighttime fish. So people think about it, they need a lot of vibration in the dark.
That was a Hail Mary fish there.
If you want to hit that one, it's a Hail.
Oh, fish! Oh, quick places, yeah. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. John, we did it. Unfreaking believable. Great net job. Thank you very much. Just a little bit ago, I was saying about how you have to stay focused. It is dark, we got the lights going, and we just got ourselves an Ottawa River Musky.
Beautiful, baby.
On a Franken Suick again, that big old jerkbait. Big fish want to eat big baits. There we go. John, it's dark out. We got the spotlights going. The sun's pretty much down. And we got ourselves another big old Ottawa River Musky.
Beautiful.
What a beautiful looking
Beautiful
fish.
minute. Beautiful fish. Fourth quarter. Last minute of the fourth quarter.
One thing I noticed watching
fun,
that.
Brent?
Oh, that was, you know what? That's probably the best 2.5 days I've had in the water in a long time. And I always have fun on the water. But if you watch, something that really bugs me about that video, my body positioning. I was on my backhand working that bait, and I didn't get a really good hook set because of my body positioning. And I don't know if you heard it in there or not, but I can remember you saying that fish only had one hook in it. Where the couple fish that we got with Lisa, I was proper body positioning, and we actually had to cut the hooks out of it because I was able to get a good hook set. So, we were fortunate to get that fish, but and lucky in a way because my body positioning, I didn't get a good hook set.
Interesting point on that. A couple of things. One, it's not a vibration bait and it's catching fish in the dark. Two, if you're fishing in the dark, we talked about the weighted Suick and suspending. It takes your fish longer to key in on that bait and to actually get a hold of it. Longer than if there was light, It's a sight predator and it's netting off of its lateral line. So again, suspending bait in the dark. We were in like 8 feet of water. Perfect was the Franken Suick, Brent's favorite lure in the fall. And it's funny what you were saying about the backhand not getting. You talk about that in your show and in all your teachings, and it's a matter of this is my strong way to set. And when fights and I set that way, I rip its head off, and I tell people break my fishing rod. And one of the weak point as a guide, the weak point, the 2 fail points in musky fishing is that. And with wooden baits, a lot of people don't understand how strong a muskie's jaws are. And so when they bite wood, those fish are getting their teeth stuck into this wood. When they're on a feed and they're hitting hard, they're getting their teeth stuck into it. And so that real rip the head off hook set that Brent's talking about, if you don't do that a lot of the times, you pull and you don't even move the bare mouth. So, the reason that you have the rod tip pointed at the fish, and why you put everything into it is when they get a hold of it, you need to move that bait in their teeth and their mouth. And so the first 2 minutes, I waited. I had a massive Suick order from Steve last year. It took 4 months with COVID shipping and the border. And I was going crazy, and I was phoning Steve every week. Please, I need these, man. Is there tracking numbers? And no, they didn't know where anything was. It came, I got it. I took this bait out. The first time I threw it in the fall, I watched it float up off the side of the boat. I was with Kent Rosen, who's watching this, and it floated up, and a fish came up just as it got to the surface, bit and creamed it. And I was on my bad side, Brent, and my shoulder's sore, and it's November, and I'm cold. But I couldn't get the hooks into it, I was on my good side. If I was planning on it, I would have smoked that fish. But, it wasn't all there, and it was my bad side. And as it was, the fish got away. So I had to go back and reflect on, did I lose that fish because I'm 60? Was that an old age fish? Is that because I just didn't get it anymore? But no. Turns out it was just bad technique in the end, Brent, and I still got lots of good hook sets, and we'll be okay. So.
Yeah, body positioning is huge, no matter what bait you're throwing.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about the other baits, the soft plastics, and surface baits. That's another category, but soft plastics are a game changer. One of the big changers in the muskie world in the last 25 or 30 years. So Curly Sue, love this. Susie Sucker, love this bait. And so,
Mike, I'm curious.
What do we want?
What your favorite soft plastic is?
My favorite?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's a toss-up. Either the last few years, I've really liked the 11-inch Susie Sucker. You can just work it real slow, and it's got such a nice thump behind it. But I do still like the Curly Sue too. But I think the 11-inch Susie Sucker
right there.
Yeah.
Yep, there it is. You can work that so slow, and just a straight retrieve back to the boat. About 15 fish on doing that.
That right there in the blue. That right there in the blue skies and sunshine for me in the high pressure. That's the color, and that's a bait, and exactly what you said about working it slow. The Susie Sucker, the smaller size, the one down from this, an easy bait to throw. Not a lot of work. You can just sit back and again let the reel do the work for you. And the tail is what catches the fish. So
yeah, and
when do you like to?
What was that?
Go right ahead. When do you like to throw soft plastic? Let's put that out as an open question. Anybody, when do you choose to throw soft plastic?
Soon as the ice melts. So I throw them myself. I'll throw them right from when the season opens, right through to the end of the season. Difference is, end of the season I'm going to work them slower, of course, when the water's cold. But I'll actually take a Susie Sucker and I'll work it like a jerkbait. So instead of that dive and rise, it's actually got a rise and then a sharp drop on the pause. So it's a little bit different than where the Suick is going to go down, float up, go down, float up. It's actually got a sharp nosedive. And I've caught a lot of fish working the Susie Sucker, the 9-inch in the Kawartha Lakes, working it like a jerkbait.
Yeah, for me, depending on how many people I have in the boat, it's often like you scout, right? Like you've got someone chucking blades, someone on a jerkbait, somebody on rubber. It's a good way to kind of figure out on a tough day, especially what's working. But for me, especially in August, I find, when the fish have seen a ton of blades at that point, chucking some rubber is a really good idea. And then, of course, into the fall, it's a huge tactic in the fall.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, with 3 rods in the, as I said at the start of the show, I was taught fishing with 2 people. You have a black bucktail and you have a wooden bait and you're a Suick. And so with 3 people in the boat, if I think it's, I never try and tell the muskies. I have an idea of activity when I head out, but you don't want to tell them how you want to catch them. And so, if it's 3 rods, we'll probably go 2 blades and a jerkbait, and we'll assume that there's activity and we can get some fish moving, and if you hit 1 or 2 spots like that, those are good cover water baits. And if you hit a couple of spots that fish are usually on and you're not seeing fish, I'm one of the guys after that has got off plastic bait until we start to see activity. As soon as I think there's less activity, I'm going to a soft stick bait right away. And as a guide, the other thing I'll say, and to all my guests who I give soft plastics to, this isn't about you, but as a guide, you need an idiot bait. You need a bait that you can just give to your guest, no matter who they are, no matter what their abilities are, and especially if their abilities are somewhat limited, or they're new, or they're really young, or they're tired and they don't have it anymore, and the lure is going to catch the fish. And the soft plastic baits, that's that bait, because there is no wrong way to reel in a curly sue. It's one of the baits that didn't come with instructions, okay? But, this size right here, especially, that is not a lot of weight to throw, and it doesn't matter what you do with it. It's the tail that catches the fish. Now, there certainly are some better things. There certainly are some better things to do with it. Brent, you said you talked your retrieve as almost a jerkbait retrieve with this, but you're still getting some dive and rise about it. And for me, that's the basic retrieve with this is just treat people say, what do I do with that? Well, pretend it's a jerkbait. Pull and pause, and it's going to drop just a little bit every time you pause. And here's the thing, is that the hits always come on the pause, right? It's at the end. It's not while you're moving it. It's at the end on the pause, and you can try different lengths of pause again, 3 feet, or you can sweep it 8 feet and let it have a little more drop. But it doesn't matter what you do, those will work. Comment?
They're real easy bait to finish at the side of the boat with too, because you can just keep a straight retrieve at the side of the boat, make your angle, make your turn, go on a big circle or an 8, and that tail's going to do all the work, whether it's the curly sue or the Susie sucker.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. Well,
idiot bait. The other retrieve that the other real big use for me with soft plastics is when your fish are shut down. When your fish are active, you want to cover water, and so your blade baits cover water. Fishing a Suick quicker covers water. Your soft plastics, a lot of the time, it's a little more work bringing those through. You can fish fast with them if you want, but fishing slow with them. And so, a lot of my New Jersey guests taught me the Jersey retrieve, and I've said it a lot of times, and it goes against traditional musky fishing. It's throw this bait out, let it get to within 2 or 3 feet of the bottom, stick your belly out, lean back, drop your jaw, and reel like this. And that's the whole program. And when nature's not moving, the birds aren't flying, you haven't seen a fish for a while, they're all laying on the bottom. And so that real low Jersey retrieve, that's what catches fish, on those blue sky days, those tough fishing days. So, if you're not seeing fish, you got to change. Fishing slow is just it. And doesn't matter what you do with that tail. It's all about all about that tail, and the same on these. So
we got to go back just for a minute here because we've had the same question asked by about 3 or 4 different people now, back on the jerkbait. So I'll just pop one up here.
Okay.
And we could maybe go around in a circle and get everyone's thoughts on steel or fluorocarbon for Suick's.
I'll go first there if you want. My answer is going to be yes. I run a lot of actually Suick makes a steel leader that I use on my jerkbaits, and they work great. If you're first starting out, I'm going to say use a steel leader with a little bit of heat shrink on it, so that right where the swivel, or pardon me, where the snap meets the steel leader, you're not going to get your jerkbait hooked up on your hooks that way. You get a little bit more experience. The fluorocarbon works great when you have a good steady cadence. You know, I use the same the same leader for pretty much everything. But when you're first starting out, I would say if you're not, don't have a really good cadence and you're just learning, go with a solid steel leader.
Yeah, so my answer would be steel. I'm not a huge fan of fluorocarbon leaders. I know a lot of people are, but me personally, I'm not a huge fan. But with a Suick especially, there is some side-to-side action to it as well. And with the steel leader, where the snap is, that'll actually work as a hinge, and that'll help your side-to-side action. Where on a fluorocarbon, you always get kind of a bend in that fluorocarbon, and I personally think that deadens it a little bit. But that's my opinion, steel.
all right. Well, disagreeing with the guy who invented the bait, seems like a bad idea. But I'm going to say Brent had a really good point that, especially for people that are starting it, and if you go and look at Brent's first appearance on here where he did Musky 101, and we actually show the steel leader and the piece of shrink tube that Brent attached and how he attached it. And that'll keep, if you don't have good cadence, that will keep your wire leader from your bait. But as you get more adept, honestly, I am a one-trick pony. I use a fluorocarbon leader for everything. The wire leaders, again, for people, especially glide baits, that's where I see the advantage, because you can walk the dog better with a hard wire leader on a glide bait for sure. But when you get more experience, for me, it's about time. I try and get my guests to get like 40 or extra casts in a day. As soon as we stop on a spot, the motor's down, and I ask them why they're not casting, and I always have the rod in their hand. And so that floor leader, that gets us more time, and no mess around. 1 leader all the time. Fish hard.
Yeah, I think that comes down to guiding for us, John, right? It's we got to keep it simple. We're constantly switching lures. So to be trying to switch leaders on top of that, honestly, it would just take time away from casts. And as you guys know, Brent talks about it all the time. You have to make every cast count. So we keep it simple, but I definitely agree. And like you said, John, specifically with glide baits, and Mike touched on it, getting that side-to-side action, really the solid wire leader does make a difference. So, but like you said, we keep it simple. We're guiding. We're out there all the time.
Simple is good. Yeah. All right. Wow. We try and run a 90-minute program. We rarely succeed, but I don't know. I think it's like 90 minutes right now, and I think we've covered our topics pretty well. If there's a last good question that anyone wants to throw into us right now, I'll give one more plug to the Musky Trader Symposium, raising money for musky research this weekend. Brent Bochek is going to be there. I'm going to be there. Lisa Goodier is behind the scenes, volunteering her time once again for a great musky cause and raising money. Danny Osborne. There he is, Danny. 47 muskies in the last 3 years in the fall on Suicks. You learn a new trick. You learn a new trick. A little bit on speed. Man, I love fishing with Brian and Danny. 47 fish on one of these. You better have one in your box. And if you didn't hear on the other shows, I didn't tell everybody because I haven't said it enough already. We're now a Suick dealer. We have the Franken Suicks here. And at the rate on out the door in the past week, I'm going to be calling Mike again in a week. But get your Franken Suicks from us right now. Stacy Ash at Pro Tackle in Belleville. Stacy's some guy. He's got a great selection of stuff. That's the two places for you to get Suicks here in Canada. Your Franken Suick. It's hard to get. I know Suick is so in demand. Mike's working 14-hour days, so appreciate you taking time from the production line to come and join us tonight, Mike. Great job as always. Thanks everybody.
Glad to be here, John.
Suick, yeah. Pleasure to have you in Wisconsin, muskie capital of the world, except for Ontario. Wonderful.
We'll have to get Mike down here. So
thanks for coming out, everybody.